Hello, my name is Callie Hoyt. I'm the Director of Federal Government Relations with the National Marine Manufacturers Association. 2020 was a record-breaking year for the recreational boating industry, as more Americans took to the water as a way to spend time with loved ones in a safe environment. New boat sales reached a 13-year record high, a trend we expect to continue this year, and the industry continues to be a leading contributor in the nation's economic recovery. Annually, the industry contributes over $170 billion in economic activity while supporting 700,000 U.S. jobs and 35,000 businesses. Since the onset of the pandemic, recreational boating has served as a lifeline for coastal communities. As one of the few activities that was embraced in the era of social distancing, recreational boating has kept regional economies afloat and will continue to do so long as boaters have access to healthy waters. Getting boaters out on the water is essential to the recreational boating industry's success, but doing so requires updated, climate-resilient recreation infrastructure and access points. The poor condition of many public boat ramps, docks, and waterways are exacerbated by the effects of climate change. Our industry must work together with state and federal lawmakers to protect boating access, invest in much-needed, resilient infrastructure, and ensure boating may continue to contribute to coastal communities' economic health across the nation. On behalf of the National Marine Manufacturers Association, it's our pleasure to sponsor today's Resilient Coastal Communities panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of your Capitol Hill Ocean Week. As many of you know, I represent a significant part of Charleston, South Carolina. And I really appreciate what the ocean means, not just for recreational purposes, for what I know it should be the future of diversifying the energy that we have and that we need. In order to make energy accessible and affordable. You may know that back when we were putting the so-called Recovery Act together back in 2009, one of the things I advocated for has resulted in Clemson University getting a grant from the government to develop a wind turbine energy that we hope will be the world's largest. They're doing it there on the site of the old naval base in Charleston. And the kind of turbine that I am hopeful can be used safely in the ocean in order to help generate energy for the future. Because as so many of you know, I am a strong believer that we should not be drilling off of our coastlines. That in addition to energy, we need to preserve the integrity of the economies along the coast of the Southeast. So I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this effort. Whenever you think I can be of service in carrying out your duties and responsibilities, do not hesitate to let me know. Thank you, and Godspeed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Castor of Florida, and I'm honored to join you for Capitol Hill Ocean Week. I represent the Tampa Bay area in the House of Representatives and serve as the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, where we work to make American communities healthier and more resilient. Speaker Pelosi created the Climate Committee with one ambitious goal in mind: for us to create a framework for Congress to solve the climate crisis. It is a huge task, especially as hotter temperatures and pollution are harming our communities and industries and costing us more every day. Our action plan is now serving as a roadmap for legislation, and it's informing the work of the Biden administration as well. In the House, right now, we're advancing solutions that expand clean energy and protect our natural resources, including our oceans and coasts. Protecting our ocean is vital to solving the climate crisis. Plus, as a native Floridian, I know firsthand how important clean water, clean beaches are to a healthy economy. Many workers earn their livelihoods in tourism and fishing, and they are very concerned because our ocean is increasingly impacted by the changing climate. Warmer temperatures are causing ocean acidification and producing harmful algal blooms. It's leading to declines in biodiversity and hurting fish stocks in Florida and other communities. And I hate to see the declines in our beautiful coral reefs. So ocean climate action is crucial. I'm teaming up with Chair Raul Grijalva to develop the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. We need your help to move this bill in the House, then to the Senate, then to the President's desk. Furthermore, we don't need to expand dirty, risky oil drilling off of our coastlines. That's why I've authored the Florida Coastal Protection Act. Last year, it passed the House with a large bipartisan vote, and I ask your help to let's move this bill again through the House and all the way to President Biden's desk for signature. Protecting the ocean is going to be vitally important to keeping temperatures in check and avoiding catastrophic harms across America and across planet Earth. That's because the oceans are huge carbon sinks. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that helps keep heat trapping gases at bay. When we released our action plan last year, we emphasized the need for a healthy ocean. Our plan recommends that we protect at least 30% of our coasts and oceans by 2030, a goal known as 30 by 30. To do that, we have to increase and diversify our marine protected areas and make new investments in coastal protection and restoration. We're lucky right now to have allies in the Biden administration. The president has already issued an executive order that doubles down on our 30 by 30 goal. It's directed the Interior Department to work with state and local leaders to help us reach that goal. And now proposed an American Jobs Plan that calls for a $50 billion investment to improve resilience in our infrastructure, our communities, and our natural resources so we can meet the challenges of the climate crisis. But to move the jobs plan, we're going to need your help. This is our moment. The costs of the climate crisis are escalating, but we have an enormous opportunity to create jobs and clean energy and make our communities more resilient to climate impacts. We cannot do it without you. So press ahead and keep up the great work. Thanks so much.
Happy Capitol Hill Ocean Week. I'm Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici from Northwest Oregon, and I'm honored to co-chair the House Oceans Caucus with Congressman Young from Alaska. Together, we work with more than 80 of our colleagues to protect the health of our ocean. I'm grateful that the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation is convening this virtual discussion about our resilient coastal communities with an important focus on equity and environmental justice. As a member of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, I'm committed to advancing ocean climate solutions. I recently led many of my colleagues in calling for $10 billion for coastal restoration and resilience projects as part of the upcoming infrastructure package to build back better. Healthy coastal ecosystems provide habitat for fisheries, improve biodiversity, protect shorelines from storms and sea level rise, and improve water quality. Protected mangroves, tidal marshes, seagrasses, and kelp forests can help remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for centuries to millennia. By investing $10 billion in coastal restoration and resilience projects, we can help capture the power of the ocean in mitigating the climate crisis, make our coastal communities more resilient, and create good paying jobs in coastal communities. Unfortunately, as we have learned from the IPCC's special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate, some of the effects of the climate crisis on our ocean are already locked in. But we still have time to act to help our coastal communities adapt and become more resilient. Last month, the House passed my Bipartisan Coast Research Act to expand scientific research, monitoring, and adaptation to ocean acidification and coastal acidification. These efforts will help identify risks and inform vulnerable communities, industries, and coastal and ocean managers about how they can best prepare for and adapt to changing conditions. Thanks to your research, education, and outreach efforts, there is bipartisan interest in advancing ocean climate action. I look forward to our continued work together to advance policies that protect our ocean and our planet.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our panel here today on resilient coastal communities. My name is Monica Barra, and I am an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina in the Department of Anthropology in the School of the Earth, Ocean, and Environment. And I'm really excited to be here today to moderate this conversation with a lovely panel here with me to talk about these questions around kind of resilience and what we both can learn from coastal communities living on the front lines of climate change, but also kind of how we can think about the ways that we use these terms in our own kind of work, whether that's policy type work, if you're working for an NGO, whether that's in your relationships with federal state agencies, or even through your own attempts, depending on kind of where you're at, to work with communities living on the ground. So each of our panelists today has extensive on the ground experience. Some of them are even on the ground, so to speak, as we would say right now during our conversation here. And so what I'm going to do is briefly introduce all of our panelists and ask each of them to tell us a bit about their work, and then we're just going to roll into a conversation really trying to what I would say kind of critically tackle this kind of question about what we mean by resilience and what resilient communities are, and try and really think about how we can push kind of all of ourselves to really move into the kind of necessarily more challenging kind of aspects of what it means to do work that's centered around equity and justice, which is the kind of broader theme of this conference this year, and how we can kind of do that from the grounds of starting with resilience, but maybe not ending there. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. And with that, I'm just gonna call on each of y'all to do a brief introduction of yourselves here. So Ms. Colette, you caught my eye first, so I'll call on you here. Ms. Colette Pichon-Battle is the Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, and she is also a lead in the movement for Black Lives on climate work and climate justice. So we're really excited to have you with us. And please tell us a bit more about your background and work.
Thank you so much, Monica, and bonjour, y'all. Again, I'm Colette Pichon-Battle, calling in from Southeast Louisiana, the traditional lands of the Choctaw Nation, and it's such an honor to be here and to talk about this, to be here with such esteemed colleagues, and Monica, with you and your care for the muddy places with trees and water. Just really want to thank you for your leadership as well. Yeah, my work really started in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and continued and deepened in the aftermath of the BP oil drilling disaster, and then has grown really over these last few years into this national racial moment and the reality of this climate crisis in Black communities. I'm excited to be anchoring the Red, Black, and Green New Deal with the movement for Black Lives, but also excited that the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy anchors Gulf South for a Green New Deal across 5 southern states, and has facilitated Southern communities for a Green New Deal across 13 southern states, really getting Southern communities to take their stance on what this next round of federal investments, of dismantling structures, of building and creating new structures for a better society and a better world, to make sure that Southern voices are a part of that design and that creation. And it's been an honor to make sure that the world sees not just the challenging parts of the South, but the South's finest parts, its strongest parts, its people, its tradition, its will, its faith, and all of those things coming to bear in a movement to save the planet, to be in solidarity with the global South, and to move as folks who are guiding the moral compass of this nation. This work has been, it really stems from connecting housing and healthcare and education to things like climate disaster and what happens to our queer and trans folks in the midst of evacuation, and what happens to immigrants when there's no electricity and food. I mean, this has been a huge learning curve for me, but a wonderful lesson in the potential of humanity, as well as how innovation really needs to meet this moment of rebuilding our social systems. So this has been a great honor. It continues to be a great honor to meet up with folks who love things like mud and crawfish and shrimp and trees and water and rain, to know that we are the people standing on the front line guiding, and we should be guiding this conversation because our traditions, our people, our ancestors have always been on the front lines of managing our biology and our ecological diversity. It feels great to be in this moment, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Colette. That was lovely. Why don't we move geography a little bit here? Dr. Victoria Herman is joining us today, and she is the president and managing director of the Arctic Institute. So please tell us a bit more about your work and maybe where you're located too.
Ooh, Monica, I knew you were going to call on me after Colette, and I was really hoping you weren't, because I don't know how I'm going to top that introduction. But hey, everyone, my name is Victoria Herman. Like Monica said, I am the managing director of the Arctic Institute. And for the past 6 years, I've had the real privilege of managing a team of about 45 researchers across the Arctic. So we're changing geographies a bit from the south to the far north, stretching from Alaska all the way through to Russia. And I think for me, most of my work in the Arctic, but also beyond, focuses on coastal communities and culture and heritage, right? What makes us who we are, whether you are growing up on the shores of Jersey, like I did, or alongside my friends and colleagues in Northwest Alaska or in Greenland. What connects us to our shorelines, what connects us to the ocean is our identity, the food we eat, the places that we love, the people that make those places what they are. And the climate crisis challenges all of that, right? It challenges who we are, coastal people across the world. And in the Arctic, climate change, global warming is happening at nearly 3 times the rate of the global average, right? The best time to act on climate was yesterday. So everything that we do needs to be on, 3 times fast forward. We need to be working all day, every day, thinking about what solutions need to be implemented together, in the United States, but really across the region. And I think that's so important, especially for the Arctic this week. For those who don't watch the Arctic news, which I may be the only one on this panel that keeps an eye on that. The Arctic Council, the governance body of the Arctic, is meeting this week, where all of the foreign ministers from across the region are meeting. And now I think is really the time to push these big frames of thinking about identity and culture and the climate crisis and the need for action together across the region, where all nation states and indigenous nations can come together and put out a really bold plan for acting on climate and elevating indigenous leaders at the front of that plan. So that's me from the north. Maybe I'll toss it back to you, Monica, and we can move geographies again.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I hope we get to talk more about these kinds of shifts in power that you were just alluding to, because I think it's a big part of how we need to be thinking about approaching these questions around resilience, especially if we're going to start talking about justice and climate justice and do that seriously. So I'm really excited to be in conversation with you about this. All right, so we also have back down in Louisiana, Miss Sandy Nguyen with us today, who is the Executive Director of Coastal Communities Consulting, locally known as CCC, for those of you who are up and around the Louisiana area. And we are thrilled to have her here as well. So Sandy, you want to tell us a bit about the work you do and what you're thinking about as we come into this conversation?
Hi, everyone. So happy to be invited to talk about on behalf of the community I serve. I am the Executive Director of Coastal Communities Consulting. We are a nonprofit organization that services entrepreneurs and families along coastal Louisiana. We specialize in business technical assistance, economic development, tremendously good with disaster assistance, and now incorporating environment and climate injustice and all this good stuff that just came about, incorporating it into our work. CCC was established in 2010 after 5 years of recovery work with Katrina. Just a little bit of background. I've been doing this as a direct result of my parents' struggle as immigrant in a new country. We came to Southeast Louisiana because of the climate and the fishing industry. It allowed my dad to hop on a boat and begin working right away. At the very young age of 14, when daddy didn't speak the language and had issues with policies and keeping the boat in compliance, as the oldest child and a girl, I was responsible at a very early age to take over the business side of it to alleviate the hardship and struggle my parents went through. From there, dad's friend, the whole community in New Orleans, after Katrina, I went out to the coast and found out that our generational oyster American fishermen were far behind as far as business, how to run their business. In Southeast Louisiana, especially in coastal communities, commercial fishing is one of the biggest industry that's a kind of driving force of our state. However, the people along the coast do not treat their business like a business. So I started kind of like bits and pieces, educating everyone about their business. They don't like change. And then the service that I provide allowed me to gain this trust, whereas now they kind of depend on me for everything. And so after Katrina, the spill happened. We were gone through 10 years. Colette knows this. So when I'm talking to you about my community, one of the things that everyone should keep in mind is that we're probably the only area in this whole world that has been through 3 back-to-back, very different, catastrophic disaster. So when you think about resilience, I don't think myself or the community I serve really understand what that word means. And since it's come about, to me, for the last 3-4 years, when this word came about, to me, resilience with the community I serve in is what you make it. And if I had to go back to the 15 years of and dealing with the pandemic right now, I don't think anyone is as resilient as the fishermen of Southeast Louisiana. They have been dismissed, excluded all their lives. So I'm actually coming to everyone today from Beers, Louisiana, where the eye of Hurricane Katrina hit, closest to the BP oil spill. If I didn't come out here during COVID, none of these small businesses will be able to gain the loans, the grants, and other programs that everyone else is entitled to. But they don't, they can't. access to information, no internet service. So, and this is something we want to talk to Colette about, right? Policies. Where I'm not good at is the policies, the government side of this. I'm strictly for the community and for that family. And so when we talked about injustice, right? Inequality. Basically, I've been doing this at the age of 14. I'm still doing the same thing I'm doing. But I never knew is what I've been doing is my way of advocating for social injustice, environmental injustice, inequality, is that I've Condoleezza Rice was on a panel. Advocacy works in very different ways. I never thought of myself as an advocate, but the service that I provide, the connect, the things I do every day for our community, that's my way of advocating for social and environmental injustice and everything else that's going around. I didn't know any of this until recently. So I'm not a formal speaker. I just speak from my gut and my heart. But I think that I have a lot of information to share when it comes to the coast, the families, and the small businesses. And so thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you for that, Sandy. And I will, as an academic, and that has not. And I've been working in Louisiana for 6-7 years now, but not nearly as long as yourself or Colette. And I will say, in particular, the work that Sandy does is an understatement to see the kind of level of service that I know personally that she does in her communities. And I think it's a really good jumping off point for us to think about what you just brought up, right? This word resilience that, to say it's only 5 years old, I think is generous. I feel like it's been floating around for a really long time. And it's one of those terms, and I'll say this from my own kind of personal perspective. I get really frustrated when I hear that term. And especially when it's used as this kind of blanket way to kind of walk easily into conversations around inequalities, right, and power differences. And that's kind of where the mentality sometimes I get into when I think about this, especially when people, they'll ask me, they'll come into my classroom, or I'll get an email that says, what can we do to help communities be more resilient? Or how can we incorporate these frameworks into our scientific work without really taking, I think, the time to break it down. So I wanted to at least start us off today with thinking about this term, right? And what comes to mind for each of you in your respective work and experiences and background. And we have a nice, I think, array of, from on the ground work to academic work to legal advocacy. There's a great level of experience here in this virtual room. So resilience, this loaded term, right? And I don't know, you could disagree with me, but I think it's a deeply contested one, in a number of circles. So maybe I feel like they kind of want to start us off saying kind of what comes to mind and what you think about when this term pops up in your inbox or comes up at a conference, or maybe in other contexts where you encounter it, right? What does it mean to you? And then maybe you can speak a little bit of what it means to the communities you work with, or what it doesn't mean too. So, yeah, you want to get us started? Sandy, you kind of did a minute ago.
Yeah. So, just going back to my introduction is when the definition of it in the dictionary. Look at how our fishermen, the industry here, and the restaurants. When I talk about fishermen in coastal Louisiana, you're talking about the gas station, the mom and pop store, the welding store, everything that goes down with the industry along coastal Louisiana. After Katrina, government money didn't come around until 2 years later, and many of them didn't even understand or know. If they knew about it, they couldn't navigate through the process. Okay, and so they put their business back on their own. If you were a welder, you go weld your boat and you go down to your friend's boat. No money exchange. They're not going to call people and wait for professionals from out of town to come, right? They put themselves back. At time after time, every hurricane, the spill the word was uncertainty. They seem to be around when so many factors. You have the imports they're fighting with, the prices, the diesel, everything's getting more expensive. Our coast is depleting. We have a big master plan, doing massive big project that scientifically has stated is going to impact the seafood, right? So to me, if they've been able to survive the last decade and a half and still have their business right now, isn't that resilience? I think so. It is. I think resilience is what you make it. When you look about resilience, could be economics. When the city of New Orleans, the mayor, our city is great. We are so resilient after the storm. We are great. We bounce back. But resilient to the city of New Orleans then was like taking away all the poor communities, rebuilding it to where they can't come back, shifting them out, gentrification. But is that the way the city of New Orleans called resilient? It could be resilient, could be anything. But to the people I serve, number one, they don't know what that word means. And number two, they've been resilient and quite frankly, adapt all day, every day. Because they work on the water, they live on the water, they eat off the water and the land. However, they've never been included in anything. So my question to the audience today is, and this is the question that has been coming at me from the coastal communities. Are human beings part of the environment? Or is it just the turtles you're trying to protect or the whales? This is a question that the community has asked. So no one has come about. This is why I got popular by accident. I've been doing the same thing I've been doing for 30 years, but just kind of got accidentally popular because I'm servicing a community that nobody cares about, willing to talk to, been subdued, dismissed, excluded all their lives. You're doing projects that you know are impacting them, but have never sat down and discussed with them. And this is where the problem is now, that we kind of need to kind of work on, because there are big things coming as far as projects in Louisiana. And what our environmental NGOs here locally have done is they funded me and they allowed me to see, educated me to see the big picture. So I'm at a point where I have the trust of the whole coastal communities I've serviced for many years. And I've also aligned myself with untraditional partners, environmentalists, state folks, to where this is our goal now moving forward, is to educate both sides to understand each other and alleviating as much injustice as I can do. And it's the key to any big projects to be successful, if that makes sense. To me, resilient is what that individual person or family does that could be applied to that word. That's how I see resilience.
Like it. I like it. Victoria, Colette, you want to jump in here?
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sandy, right? Resilience is what you make of it. When I see resilience, I feel like it is such a narrow, purposefully narrow term, right? It ignores who has forced a community to be resilient and what happens past the point of resilience because of what someone did, right? Resilience isn't something that just exists, right? You have to bounce back from a shock event. We get this word from ecology, and ecosystems bounce back once there is a shock event. For humans, that shock event, the climate crisis, is not something that just occurred naturally. There's responsibility that is tied to that, right? There is, for many communities in the Arctic, it is not just climate change, right? It is so many shock events that date back centuries, right? From the first point of colonialism all the way up to 2021. Each of those shock events was from someone's decision. It did not just happen. So when I see resilience, we talk about how communities are resilient, and they bounce back, but there is a reason they have to bounce back. Someone who's responsible for that. And I kind of feel like resilience is a cop-out term because it means that we don't have to talk about that. And then on the flip side, right, there's a point at which you can't adapt any further, right? When the ice is gone, the ice is gone. There is no getting it back. And at that point, you're talking about loss and damage. And responsibility is tied to loss and damage too. But if you just talk about resilience, you don't have to talk about responsibility, and you don't have to talk about where resources are coming from for that. So I think, that resilience, it's used a lot, and it's really narrow, and that's not happenstance. It's purposefully narrow. So we don't have to think about responsibility of where shock events are coming from and where resources should be allocated from to support communities that already have solutions, and they have the solutions in the situation someone put them in, but those resources need to come from somewhere. And to ignore those two other ends of resilience is kind of ignoring the conversation of who is responsible for those resources.
Oh man, I love it. I mean, I think where Sandy and where Victoria have gone is the truth, right? It's the truth of it. And I love the question because, this is a word to where we would never use it on the ground, but we know when we're talking to funders or even decision makers, is the word that has to be used in that space with no real examination of it, right? Just sort of a comfort level. In 2015, Gulf South Rising Initiative across 5 states had a community session that outright rejected the word and said, we're moving from resilience to resistance. And it was really a little bit of an attitude that folks were given in addition to, the critique that Sandy was given. It could mean anything, but here's what we know you think it means to us, and here's how we're reacting to that. Stop hitting us, because you're hitting us to call us resilient, and we don't want the hit anymore, right? If we get the term resilient because you want to see how long you can keep hitting us, then we'll reject the term. Don't make us resilient. Let's just resist whatever the action is altogether, and let's start from there. And as I contemplate the word resilient, because I have to use it interchangeably now, and I had to make some peace with it. I really did think about, what was resilient to me. And I'm so glad, Victoria, you mentioned that this is coming from ecology, and this is about that shock to a thing. Because what came up for me was the oak trees post-Katrina, and how many oak trees along the coast made it, right? Despite a 30-foot tidal surge off the Gulf, despite, I live with a lot of pine trees, a lot of stuff went down. We lost 2/3 of our tree cover here in St. Tammany Parish in that storm. But the oaks, so many old oaks survive, and you see what it means to be a 300 and 400 year oak. And you wonder, what that tree has seen, and how much water and how much wind and how much mankind and how many animals that tree has really been around. And that is resilience. And that is what I thought about it. And it is beautiful. It's also not human, right? It might be otherworldly, but it is not human. And I think when we use the term resilience and we're using it on human populations or to describe humans, we are missing exactly what Victoria is talking about, the accountability of it, right? There's no examination that the use of this word is being used to alleviate guilt and shame of maintaining a system that continues to harm people, right? You want to be able to call us resilient so that you don't have to examine your role and anybody else's role and what is happening to us. And so it's got to be rejected, or at least examined, or at least critiqued, if for nothing else, for the use and how, the use in the different spaces and what it's really meant to avoid. But I think perhaps more than honing in on what it's trying to avoid, let's start using it the right way, right? Let's give honor to these oak trees that have been resilient. Let's give honor to these many species that have been resilient here. And let's, when we're talking about communities, instead start talking about maybe their power, how to get behind their knowledge, and stop trying to offer that terminology on top of them. It invisibilizes them, it devalues them, it dilutes them because it simplifies something that cannot be simplified. Sandy's story about her parents, herself, and where that's not resilient, friends. That's magic. It's something way better than resilience. It's something way stronger than that. So, but I appreciate the question, Monica, because I think we have to start thinking about what these colonized terms mean for us as people who are always in a constant struggle to get free. Some of these words will never be good enough. Some of us will have to go back to our African, Asian, and Native American terminologies that have a better suiting for what we're trying to describe.
Yeah, and I mean, just across all of your responses, I mean, I think from just even the notion that, whose term is this, right? I mean, I think that's one thing that's really important, especially for, I think the audience is kind of watching this, right? To remember that's a term that comes out of science, out of ecosystems, right? And kind of where do you put people in there in the first place? But people's just like the first layer of that, right? To understand if it's about this kind of bounce back ability, like to what? What was that status quo, and is that status quo desirable, right? And I think sometimes the approach around resilience it certainly does eradicate the histories that produce the conditions through which we even begin talking about resilience in the first place, right? But it also, I think, shuts down, or at least doesn't make enough space for asking about what do communities want? Like, what is a desirable future for a place, like the Arctic, right? Or coastal Louisiana, which is something that's often missing from these kinds of conversations around resilience, even when they are, working towards kind of more inclusion. And, I heard a lot of you, all three of you kind of touched on this questions of responsibility, accountability, advocacy, right, which are all about power, right, and empowerment, right? And they're all about recognizing power differentials, right? And also maybe saying, hey, we actually need to figure out how to share or give up kind of aspects of power built into the frameworks that are being used by the state, right? Or whatever, the federal, the federal government, or kind of state, multi-nation approaches to dealing with climate change. So I guess I kind of want to maybe shift us a little bit more squarely to kind of thinking about power and what kind of resilience, or maybe we don't want to kind of talk about resilience anymore, but kind of what something like resilience or something like a desirable future for the communities that you work with looks like when it's envisioned from a place of power and empowerment, as opposed to a place of disaster, which, Sandy, I was thinking about this, as you were speaking in particular, because it always seems like first disaster, then we talk about resilience. Next disaster, then we talk about better inclusion, right? What if we just flip that, right? And kind of move away from that model, right, of thinking about it. So what does it mean to kind of do this work, do climate change work, maybe more broadly, from a place of empowerment with communities, sharing power, right, and having kind of real accountability? Hmm.
For our coastal communities, when we talk about Southeast Louisiana, we're dealing with families that are not formally educated. There's 5 different cultures where I'm at right now. Business are run as like culture, like a way of life. When they do this, they lose out on a lot of grants, loans, programs that they're entitled to after a disaster or a shock event, right? So as I go and educate them to be more business savvy, corporation filing, LLC, business banking, Ms. Zena, why don't you make me do another bank? I got one bank and that's enough, right? These are the business, but in these sessions, you will hear their needs. So our programs at the CCC are always initiated, developed, and implemented by the very people that the programs are for. Is this one way government can start thinking about policies, big projects, human science, the amount of knowledge our commercial fishermen and the coastal families that generation live with, the amount of knowledge they have, real life knowledge, could be added to that science. Could be a conversation. Education builds leadership, in my opinion. I've gotten a fisherman that will only sit in the bathroom and talk about his business and his water, that can stand in front of a big audience now talking about it through my years of work. And all it is educating them and informing them. Stuff that they do not get from state agencies, big corporations, and big organizations. And so people think it's paper pushing or whatever, but I'm doing things that matters to them most. It's the professional maneuvering processes that they can't get done. But it's unfair. And I found out through all this, when the movement and all this stuff kind of happened, is that, Jesus, what I've been doing all this time has actually been sort of mitigating all the injustice. No one is doing what I'm doing. If I did not come out here, put bags on my body and stay out along the coast for 2 weeks, there's no way these small businesses would have obtained millions of dollars in CARES Act recovery dollars. The restaurants, the small businesses are entitled to it the same way. Therefore, this is why we're so big with the community, is that no one does the kind of work we do. Nobody cares, nobody takes the time. But key here is very easy. You have to be able to work together. We're dealing with, and you talk about, let's get away from that, right? I've been trying to be proactive since the CCC opened. There's no way. We've been through back-to-back devastating disaster. Moving forward with the state master plan, we have never been done before diversions that will completely, somehow will devastate the seafood industry. But it's under the EIS process. We don't know how long it will take for it to be built, but we have 5 years. Take everything, all the trust, the knowledge, what I've gained from the state, my environmental NGO friends, and my community, take everything. And for the first time, I'm in a position where I can be proactive. 5 years. And I'm going to work my hardest to create a fair and just, equitable adaptation management plan, proven to hand to the state whenever they need it. That's where I'm going. And you know what? It's great to be in the middle. And there's only one thing that I have advantage over many people, is that trust. I've been very open, honest, and doing things that really matters to them when no one else does. And so the information, the science that I've learned from the state master plan, information, updates, all of that, I did not receive a dime from the state of Louisiana. But it was that important for me to go out to the coast and transfer the knowledge that I've learned from the state to our community that will allow them to strategize, think about, and maintain and control that resilience they have in this community. I have not got a single dime of funding, but it was that important, because if I didn't do it, no one else would. So just kind of think about that when we talk about justice and how to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things, and then I'm gonna pass the mic over here. But I think a lot of the reason why you gain trust is because you figured out ways to empower the people you work with too, right? And they see that happening over time, right? And that takes time. And I feel like, I don't know about all y'all, but I feel like I say that a lot sometimes in these kinds of conversations, right? That building trust takes time, and it takes more than just a one-off meeting and an input session, right? And this gets to the other work that I think is, I know because I've been down there and seen you do this stuff in Louisiana, but actually helping with things that are kind of maybe not explicitly climate change related, right? When we're talking about just basics like helping people navigate, bureaucracy, right? Be it loan programs, be it questions around housing, banking, whatever it is, providing, I think what we used to call public services in this country. I mean, those are baseline things too that aren't disconnected, right? As part of kind of making a community feel whole.
I think those things are what matters to our folks the most.
Yeah.
Because even if they wanted to go pay for the service, they wouldn't get it. There's no one around these areas. We're too far off. You're lucky if you get the information you need, much less the service. So oftentimes if they can't reach us, or if we don't have time, or a lot of our small businesses along the coast will bypass that opportunity, and it breaks my heart, literally. And so this is what drives me. Had no idea for years and years that it is what I'm doing is part of this resilience and social injustice movement. I had no idea. But when the more I talk and learn about the issue, how Colette talk and Victoria, how you guys talk, I kind of realized that I've been doing this for a long time, and it's meaningful, and it makes sense now with what's going on in the world. So Colette, be ready, because we're gonna have to talk eventually soon.
I'm ready. I think we all three need to talk. I mean, look at who we are. Alaska, Black South Louisiana, Asian South Louisiana. I mean, these are the communities that are on the front lines of this thing, and no one's going to help us, right? Half of our communities have to bypass this, not just because the system is broken, but because the system works exactly like it's supposed to work, right? And it's meant to bypass our communities. It's meant to overlook and devalue our communities. I think the best thing we could do is get together. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, to hear these impacts of climate change is one thing. To meet the communities and to see what folks are actually going through, to see what it is to go through a disaster response. Sandy, I have the utmost respect for you and your work. I've seen you go through several disasters, and we've seen each other in this. And I cannot imagine what happens to Alaskan natives who don't have ice.
Right.
That's your identity. That's what's happening to our indigenous folks here who are losing their land to the water. What happens to who you are when the place that your identity is rooted to and the culture, the realities are shifting? Do we become different people? Do we now live in different places? This is a whole new society we're talking about. I think the best thing we could do is come together. Victoria, I'm not sure how things look in Alaska. I'm very interested, but when Monica mentioned the things that were sort of outside of direct climate, I wonder what that even means. In Alaska, we're losing land, but I don't even have an understanding of what it is to not be able to hunt because you don't have ice, or not be able to, do traditional activities because you don't have ice. I can't even compute that, but it feels like it's happening around the planet. People's land is being swallowed. The ice isn't coming. The rain is falling too hard. The droughts are coming too hot. This is lining up to be a point where we should all come together. Looks like, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just happening in one place, it's happening everywhere. And I couldn't agree more. I think the three of us need to get together after this panel, but also everyone needs to get together, right? Because it is climate change, and it's also climate change is just the top layer, like you were saying, right? Colette, the systems are working exactly how they are supposed to, which means that maybe you aren't worried about climate change today. You're worried about how there's one washer that is working in your community and it's a fly in, fly out community. And how are you going to get another washer that it's not going to be a public health crisis? Because the system's not helping with that, right? You have to be Sandy. You have to have someone who is helping you. And I think that is something that is shared across so many places, right? That it is both losing who you are and also daily struggling with other things that are very immediate. And it's trying to balance those two things of looking into the future and seeing something that is unknown, right? I think uncertainty is something that like a few people said maybe in this, and that is terrifying, right? Looking into uncertainty, real hard to figure out what you should do. Coming together and talking to a bunch of people who are looking into the future in uncertainty and figuring out what people did the last time they were staring uncertainty down, a lot better of a bet that you're going to be able to figure out something together. And I think that's what comes next, right? That's what's happening already. We're all working together, right? And we got to do a lot more of it.
I wanted to add something I'm sorry, the system. So
The system.
no, I don't know of a system. When I work, it's all about humans. Who's running the system? At the end of the day, it's somebody, right? Who's accountable for this? It's somebody. It's a human being. So the way I approach things is that I kind of try as much as I can to educate that human. If I need to go to the state, no, I'm not into politics. Don't care for it. But I will find someone at that office or at the state where will be willing to sit and talk to me. There's my opportunity to educate, have them understand. At the end of the day, I don't see a system, I see human beings. Who's accountable? It's got to be a man or a woman or a human being, right? Who's behind that new law that came out that's impacting the oil industry, whatever it is? It's a human. So I feel like as human beings, we should be able to sit down and grind out anything, educate, have folks understand. Because as much as our commercial fishermen deal with, you bring an environmental group that they do not like, before they do something, sit down with our fishermen, talk it out. This is going to impact your community. This is what we do. Why are we doing this? The fishermen will get it, will understand, and will maybe even help you complete that project. But decades, historically, decades after decades, it's just laws, rules, regulations, somebody suing somebody, and then at the end of the day, it's thrown upon our poor people, our small businesses, our disadvantaged community. And then it becomes resilience no more, because now you're disrupting their resilience. And then so what they do, collect, they resist. Does that make sense? It's that easy. And to be fair to government, it's very difficult for government to reach the low-lying communities. There's a thing called nonprofit community-based organization everywhere across this country. Use them. If you're going to build $1 billion project that's going to impact the entire coastal Louisiana, it takes $50,000 a year for an trusted organization like the CCC. $50,000 for me to travel to Baton Rouge, hook up with the environmental groups, come home, bring the science, tweak the science language into normal terminology, and then in 4 different languages. $50,000. Tell me the state cannot put down $350,000 for 10 organizations like myself along the coast to do a very important job that can fill in that X in their box for them. It's that easy. Never happened. And it's sad.
I think, I mean, it's interesting, you know, you ask like, who are these people behind these systems and these things, you know, and I think just speaking to like the audience, I think we're into, I mean, it doesn't have to be inevitable, right? That these processes end up these ways, right? But we also have to understand how, you know, as Colette, Victoria, you echoed this, right? These systems are by design, you know, I would certainly argue, to sacrifice certain communities, right? And I think it behooves the climate change community to really consider what on earth the connection between systemic racism, histories of colonialism, economic inequality, and the present moment of climate change, what those connections are. Now, you're probably not going to figure that out going to a meeting in Garris with a bunch of fishermen, right? But all of us, I think, have a responsibility to do our homework to figure that out, especially if we want to do this kind of justice inclusion type work that's oriented around climate change. And we have to understand all of the histories and systems that we inherit and are a product of if we even want to begin to change them in the first place, right? Down to questions of like, why is it so hard? Why is it so easy, if you will, to spend $1 billion on a restoration project and so hard to find $50,000 to hire someone from the community to work with a state agency? Now, I wish I can give all kinds of reasons why I think that might be, but I really don't know the answer because it seems easy to me. But I don't know. It looks like we probably have to wrap up here. We got about 5 minutes left. I want to give some time for closing comments on anything you feel like you want to speak on, or you still have lingering thoughts or anything that kind of was inspired by someone else. One thing I think would be maybe nice for our audience to hear is maybe a, you know, suggestion or even something just you want them to be chewing on and thinking on when they leave this session. You know, I think it would be a mighty high bar to say we can give any discrete recommendations, because clearly these things aren't that simple. But any kind of closing remarks that you really, you know, you want people thinking about when they walk away from hearing this conversation. An hour is short, but it's what we got to go with. Colette, do you want to get us started?
Sure, this has been a great conversation, and I'm so honored to be sitting with these two very strong women. It makes me proud to be a strong woman too in this climate fight. So just thank y'all. I think, you know, something to contemplate is the what are we supposed to do question. And you know, every time I get that question after a speech, after a you know, some sort of riveting moment, you know, so what do we do? It reminds me of the resilience question, right? Which is, you really want to know the answer to this? You really ready for what we need to do? Because there is some of this that begins with you changing yourself. You really taking a look at, you know, how you see the world, how you've been taught to value people and communities, how you've been taught to think about what can and cannot be compromised and sacrificed, because it's rooted in devaluation and extraction. And if we continue along those philosophies, we will not just harm the people that we devalue the most, but we're going to harm ourselves. And this is not a game anymore. The international timeline on this is less than 9 years now. We've got to move, and we've got to move past a lot of rhetoric and ego and pride and profit making, and move to something much more ethical. Humanity and broader ecosystems, and re-indigenizing ourselves. And so this really requires people who are living comfortable lives in an uncomfortable moment in the world to examine your role. And this is not a time to get stuck in guilt or to get stuck in shame, but it's also not a time to be completely silent and immobile when the world is moving to the streets and is screaming at the top of their lungs that we need change. We need those of you who have the power, the access, the ability to support the change that must happen on the ground, not because you're doing charity for us, but because you understand that your liberation is tied with our liberation. Your survival is tied with our survival. This is no longer a good deed that you can do. This is now us trying to save what little bit of democracy we have left and advancing some type of light throughout the globe, where it shows that our country can actually come back from a dark place and heal itself in a way that is helpful to the rest of the planet. You know, we have a role to play, and it's the role of the power we always like to claim. Well, we now have that responsibility and that accountability to the planet.
Yeah, and I might kind of bounce off of that because I know we're short on time, because I think the two takeaways for me is that, you know, we talk a lot about power, and you can't shift power without addressing accountability. And I think just that line is something that I want everyone to think about. And it goes off of what Colette says, right? Everything that you've been taught, everything, thinking about this moment not as an isolated moment, but one throughout history, right? We are not in 2021 as a single point, right? It is a constellation of time. And all throughout that time, power has been in the hands often of the oppressors, right? Of people who have built systems for profit and not for people, not for dignity, and certainly not for our planet. And so thinking about shifting power and how can we address accountability in that shift? And I think the second takeaway for me is that you can't do it alone. So what can you do when you log off of this? You can think about putting your ego aside and reaching out to people like Sandy, wherever you are in the world, and asking, what can I do? And listening and doing that, right? Figuring out where you can fit into the work that's already being done, that's already planned, and they just need some more power behind them.
Power.
Sandy, close us out, please.
Power, accountability, system, all of this stuff going on around me, I just never paid attention to, never cared about, because all my life is the sole purpose of our disadvantaged community. Why? There are many days when I wanted to stop. At 46, I feel like I'm not even healthy anymore after almost 30 years of doing this. But what drives me is hope. And I tell you what I do when I'm almost ready to give up. And this will dismiss all the system stuff that you guys are talking about and all this good stuff. That system got to be there, because every time when I'm down and out and about to give up, I turn back to old media coverage of the Baton Rouge flood, of the California fire, of Hurricane Katrina. And guess what? The first 3 days after every disaster, there's no such thing as system. There's no such thing as power. A Black professor will never let an old white woman fall and die in that water. All right? And the executive director of a big environmental justice organization will never let a pregnant Asian woman die in the water. The first 3 days after every disaster, I put those footage back. That's humans. We were not born racist. So yeah, there's my hope. But yeah, now I believe there's some kind of system that's teaching everyone the wrong way. How does a whole culture from a different country across the world, us, my mom and dad, came over to the United States and became racist overnight? How did that happen? There has to be some kind of system. But if you go back into those first 3 days after every disaster, guys, there's no such thing as racism. We weren't born. And that's what keeps me going. And that's where my hope lies. So we're going to keep on pushing. Best way to do it is be open-minded to learning and educating everyone. Colette, you have a lot of things to educate folks. Victoria, Alaska is probably the same thing, just colder. We're hotter. So to me, keeping the education going to our community builds our leadership. Education to organizations, government is the way to go. I don't like to fight.
I mean, thank you. We have to wrap this up, but I think all of those things are key. Education, sharing power, accountability, right? And just having hope that we can do these things, right? Because they need to be done, right? We don't really have an option, as Colette reminded us. So Thank you, Victoria, Sandy, and Colette for your time. And thank you to the organizers of the conference for inviting all of us to be here. And yeah, hopefully you have some things to think about as you go forward in your work. Take care, everyone.
Hello, I'm Radhika Fox, Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water, and it's an honor to speak to you all as part of Capitol Hill Oceans Week. I want to thank you for participating and leading on water issues. It's thanks to the work of groups like the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation that we are witnessing water's moment. I have never seen water elevated in the national conversation like it is now. Across the country and in Washington, we are seeing water as the great uniter. It can unite the nation, bring us together, and pull us out of the compounding crises that face our nation: COVID-19, the economic recession, the call for racial justice, and tackling the climate crisis. While many challenges face our oceans and the incredible ecosystems and coastal communities that they support, none is more pressing than climate change. During the President's Leaders Summit on Climate, President Biden took executive action to ensure we tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad, all while ensuring jobs and strengthening our economy. The President demonstrated leadership that will be fundamental to making progress on climate, and he reiterated his call for a whole of government solution. He called for cutting greenhouse gases and highlighted how critical infrastructure investments can be in creating resilient systems, creating jobs, and producing innovation and clean technology. We will work with the water sector to ensure that infrastructure investments keep climate and resilience at the forefront, that they play a key role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impact of climate change on communities. And this call to action is essential and it's long overdue. It will help protect our communities from the damage of the worst threats of climate change, including unprecedented superstorms and coastal flooding. Grounding equity in our climate actions is essential because communities of color and low-income people are disproportionately feel climate stress, whether it's in the form of drought, flooding, heat islands, invasive species, and sea level rise. In fact, at EPA, we are working to embed equity and racial justice in our actions on climate change and in everything that we do. And this is not just a talking point. We are engaging communities to ensure that our actions are grounded in their lived experience. We're working to ensure that our policies and programs support their health. And with the American Jobs Plan and EPA's existing grant and loan programs, we have an opportunity to uplift historically overlooked communities and make their water infrastructure more resilient to climate stress. Already, there is great work being done at the state and local level by mayors, local advocates, and community leaders. But until everyone has access to resilient, safe water infrastructure, our work is far from complete. Now is truly water's moment, and to continue building on these successes and to develop solutions that benefit all people and all communities. I want to thank you so much for your commitment to supporting our oceans and our communities and for your perspective on equity. Have a great Capitol Hill Ocean Week.